Welcome to the DecisionWise podcast series. My name is Justin Warner, and I will be the host for today's podcast. I'm joined by Kristin Chapman, a principal consultant here at DecisionWise. Kristin, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So Kristin, as a principal consultant, she leads a team of consultants who are responsible for leadership and organizational development. With extensive international experience, she has overseen organizational assessments, data analytics, and change strategies for clients in over 30 languages and 60 countries. Her areas of expertise include 360-degree feedback, employee engagement surveys, employee value proposition, and culture assessments. In her previous role as Vice President of Client Services here at DecisionWise, Kristin led a team focused exclusively on survey design, administration, research, data analytics, executive reporting, and action planning. Again, Kristin, we're really excited to have you with us here today.
Thanks, Justin.
So this month, our podcasts are focusing on the DecisionWise Employee Engagement Magic Model. The best-selling book, Magic, The 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement, specifically outlines each of these 5 keys. Again, those 5 keys are meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. Today, we're going to focus on growth and its relationship with employee engagement. So, Kristin, to get us started, let's talk about that specifically in how does growth relate to employee engagement, or maybe define how that works with employee engagement.
Sure. So growth, the definition, the working definition that we use is being stretched and challenged in a way that results in personal and professional progress. And what's interesting about that definition is that the words are really active. So, and engagement is active, right? Mm-hmm. Engagement is not a state of being just happy. It's really giving that discretionary effort, investing your hearts, hands, minds, and spirit in your work. So growth as well is a very active kind of process of stretching, challenging, making progress. And the other thing that's interesting is that, here we are in a business context, right? We're in an organization, but we're saying, look, the growth has to result in a way, or come in a way that results in not just professional progress, but also personal. And I think that's the key point here. Just in general, as humans, we are looking for moving and growing and progressing and getting better. I mean, so much of even what our American ideals are built on here in the U.S. is all about the self-reliance and kind of doing it yourself. So in a business context, that translates into people wanting to improve, get better. And so I think that the definition works well from both being personal and professional progress, this idea of actively moving.
That's great. Kristin, we often hear that, people grow and they equate that with advancement in the work that they're doing. And what you're talking about, it sounds like it's different than advancement. It's how do I grow as an individual? Maybe talk about that a little bit more in depth about how can an individual really be growing and what does that look like?
Sure. I think it's a very important distinction. And I work with a lot of organizations, and growth actually shows up sometimes as a challenge. I mean, we have a couple of questions that we'll ask on a survey around my work provides me opportunity to learn and grow. I'm challenged and stretched in a way that results in personal growth. Those scores in our surveys tend to be a little bit higher. So in the day-to-day work, people feel like, I'm generally making some progress, maybe the mid 70% favorable. Okay. Most people, 70% agree or strongly agree. What we find is when we're asking questions about my growth within the larger context of the organization, so my company or my organization provides opportunities for learning and growth, or I'm satisfied with those, we find that the scores are a lot lower. People's perceptions are, that yes, I'm doing it in my day-to-day, I'm learning, but I'm not getting from the organization what I'm looking for. So I think you hit a very key point, and that is that traditionally we viewed growth as advancement. Mm-hmm. And I think in the minds of employees, from the context of an organization, they think of growth as how do I advance? How do I move forward? meaning a vertical promotion, a title change, more compensation, right? Moving into a managerial role. Traditionally, that's been the way that people grow in an organization or advance. It's moving into a role of management. Well, we know from all of our research that, number one, that's one of the worst mistakes you can make. The skills it takes to be a good manager and the skills that it takes to be a good technical producer in your role are very different. And so just because someone is a superstar individual contributor does not mean they're going to be a good leader.
Yeah.
And so the first thing we've got to get comfortable with is that growth can't just mean promotion to a management role. We've got to look at it. Organizations have to figure out, how do we create growth opportunities for people and advancement opportunities for people that are more than just moving into management? How do we help them feel like they're going to have learning and title changes and even salary compensation? There's those chances to move up on that vertical progress without it being always moving into a management role. Yeah. There's only so many management positions. So that's kind of one thing we've got to rethink.
It's really interesting. You hear a lot of people talk about millennials and some of the challenges with millennials. And a lot of them are coming right out of college where they've had growth after growth after growth. And then they get into an organization and they're expecting some sort of growth. Do you notice anything with that with different demographic groups or how they respond differently to growth? Or is it innate in human behavior that we all want some element of growth?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of talk about millennials and they kind of get a bad rap. I think what I see with millennials is they are really anxious to learn. And it may show up because, again, traditionally in organizations, growth means advancement, a vertical movement. It may show up as a little bit overly ambitious. Wanting to be the CEO within a couple of years, right? and perhaps there's some of that, but I think when you really get down to it and you talk with a millennial or anyone, they're really looking for experiences. And so I would go back to saying that we really need to redefine what growth and advancement means in organizations. And one of my colleagues gave a great definition. It's being stretched and challenged in ways that build, improve, and strengthen personal and organizational capabilities. Oh, wow. So the word capabilities is a really nice way to look at it. How do we increase our capability? And growth isn't just limited to moving up in an organization. Rather, it's the continual process of becoming better. And I've got a kind of maybe an analogy to think about. The corporate ladder. When I say moving up the corporate ladder, what do you think about, Justin?
Yeah, you go from an individual contributor to a team leader, a manager, supervisor, into executive level leadership.
Right. And so again, it's on that management trajectory, right? Where you're increasing your influence, you're increasing your span of control, you're getting a new title, you're getting more pay. All of those things have been associated together. And again, I'm saying let's disassociate them a little bit. The corporate ladder, there's a couple of things to think about. What is a ladder leaning up against? In order for a ladder to stand up, it's some sort of structure. So I think I do a lot of house renovation. We've built a few houses and renovated a few houses. So for me, I think about, okay, if I'm putting a ladder up against a structure or a house, I can't just paint that part of the house on my way up, right? Like you've got to move that ladder to different parts of that structure in order to really get a full and complete result. And so really when we think about this idea of a corporate ladder, we've got to reframe it a little bit that, those opportunities, those experiences at all levels of the structure are really what help us grow and develop and help us learn. Getting to know the space, kind of around where you're standing before you try to move up the ladder. That's the first thing. And then, when you think about even climbing a ladder, like it's one step at a time and you're up and down and you're moving around. And so I just like this concept about it's less about a straight ladder or career path. It's more, well, it is a career path, but it's less about a straight ladder. It's more about a portfolio of experiences. And so you go back to millennials. That's what a lot of millennials are looking for. They want those experiences. And so, I'm thinking of a time I hired an employee into a project manager role, and this was a millennial. So, and it was really his first job he'd ever worked in. It was, he had a very technical role as a project manager. And at the 90-day review, I gave him some pretty clear feedback, and some of it was redirecting, like, you're doing well here, but here are some things that you're really going to need to do as as you're stepping up on that ladder. You need to kind of move it. You need to try, learn this as part of your role. Mm-hmm. And what I said, come back to me in a week and provide me a couple of goals based on our conversation. Well, he came back with goals that had nothing to do with his job. They had to do more with my job, right? Which, again, that's great if that's your goal or your long-term vision. But what I'm saying is get comfortable and explore and lean into that ladder's got to lean in, right? Lean into all of that's right around you. The understand the different businesses of your organization, understand and work with different managers, understand and try to figure out new ways of thinking, because there's so much right in front of you. And if you collect that portfolio of experiences, you're going to actually find that moving that corporate ladder is going to go a little faster. Yeah.
It's really good what you're saying, Kristin. And we always talk about employee engagement as a 50-50 proposition, right? Mm-hmm. 50% is on the employee and 50% is on the employer, right? And I love that you described how you provided some feedback to your employee as you were trying to help them understand how they could grow within their role. Maybe let's explore that a little bit more. How can an organization or a manager, how can we help create this environment where growth can exist so that the employees, just like what you were describing, can take advantage of that?
Right. Obviously, there are some very clear policies or structural things an organization can do, just making it clear around expectations. For example, one of the things that Marriott does is they say, if you're going to move up the ladder, you have to run a couple of business units before you even get considered for a C-suite role. And that's not always the case in organizations. So there are some structural things you can say, this is just how it is, and what we require, because we value the different experiences. But when it comes to kind of individuals and how they develop more experiences, I think the 50-50 comes in really importantly. I think ultimately we each own our own growth. So in the ideal situation, I would say a manager is looking out for your best interest. And I think perhaps some people come into a role, their first job, and they sort of expect their manager to tell them what to do. Yeah. Kind of expect them to give them opportunities and promote them and advocate for them. And ideally, you have a good manager that can dialogue with you and support you and kind of connect you to opportunities. But ultimately, it's your own responsibility. In fact, I was working with a leader recently, it was like last week, I think, who was kind of lamenting, and I think a newer leader in her role, and had pretty quickly a large span of control. And she said, look, my team is complaining about growth opportunities, and then their scores on the survey were pretty low. But she's like, all I've been doing is working with them on these growth opportunities. And I've been trying to figure out, how do I give more to them? Mm-hmm. And they want to grow, and I'm trying, and I'm in a bit of a panic. And what had happened in her mind is she had defined growth as a vertical path again. And she was worried about what are the steps and how do I force people, almost help them get there. And my comment to her, which I think resonated, was, don't work harder than they're willing to work. You just can't do that. So that go back to, it is a 50-50, but you've got to own your own growth path. You've got to lean into it. And, as a manager, I think we try to fix everything. Yeah. We try to take everything on for ourselves. But the reality is, people have to kind of find their own. In fact, one of the questions on the surveys that we ask that's very deliberately worded is, my manager supports my efforts to develop and grow. And we find that as about 72% favorable scores in our benchmark. Mm-hmm. So again, it's this idea that showing that it's up to you first to say, here's what I'm looking for, here's what I would like, and I'm asking for this. It's the manager's responsibility to say, let's do this first, or this would be a good step. And then for you to lean into that and do that and again, view it as a collection of experiences.
Yeah. Kristin, is there ever a time where those growth opportunities are negative? Like you talked about that manager who was, trying to give growth opportunities and it just wasn't working. But are there times that really just turns people off, that it can be a negative?
It's a good question. There's the average tenure of an employee now, especially millennials, is 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. And while we're doing a lot around technology and learning to try to get people up to speed quickly, the reality is in the first 6 months of your job, it's really about just learning your job. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we start with this, we got to come up with this big development plan. I would just say that what I find is that first 6 months for most employees is really just learning their job and getting good at that. And then you can start to have those conversations. I think there were a couple of times, and I can speak just even from a team that I managed at one point, where the growth scores were a little bit lower. And I was kind of worried about it. Mm-hmm. And I went and talked to the team and they're like, wow, we're just trying, it's not even important to us right now. We're really just trying to learn what our job is. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, let's say you have someone that has been in a role for a while, knows what they're doing, and maybe they're a little bit more stagnant, and you think, okay, I'm going to really try to challenge and stretch them. Again, it's got to be a 50-50, mm-hmm. right? Because what happens sometimes is if you put opportunities out there and kind of push, you've got to find that, what we call the zone of proximal development. You've got to find that right a spot between kind of that stress and too much learning and kind of being pushed too far. And I think we've all experienced that, especially, maybe in a newer role or when somebody else leaves and we've got newer responsibilities. And then that place of complacency. So I think that's kind of the key. And the best way to know that, Justin, really is to just, be in that constant conversation. I always would tell my team, look, I'm gonna stretch you and push you, but I'm also gonna just know we've got the life preserver, right? Mm-hmm. I'm gonna throw you a life vest. I'm not gonna let you drown. So and for each person, that's a little bit different. So you got to pay attention to the signs. You got to be in constant dialogue so that you aren't kind of pushing them beyond their capability.
Oh, that's great, Kristin. You shared a lot of examples with us, and it's great examples. I'm curious if maybe you could talk about one or two examples of organizations that you've worked with where you've seen growth as either an inhibitor of engagement or where growth has really been that driving force for employee engagement.
It's a good question. As an inhibitor of engagement, tell me a little bit more what you mean by that, Justin.
Yeah, so where growth opportunities, it shows up low on their scores, and so they're not feeling engaged because they don't have an opportunity to grow.
Mm-hmm. And, I would probably say that that sometimes growth shows up pretty clearly in a lot of organizations as being an opportunity area, probably more than any of the other magic elements, meaning, autonomy, impact, and connection. And I think partly because it's so personal. And so how do you collectively come up with, what growth opportunities are? It really is critical, that manager-employee relationship. So I would say where I've seen it be inhibiting is if that becomes an area of focus when it's not time for it to be an area of focus. Correct. So when you have a lot of organizations are going through growth themselves as an organization, there's a lot going on. That in and of itself can be reframed as a growth opportunity. I worked with one organization, kind of a smaller startup that's been around maybe 7 years or so. And, they said, we don't have time for growth. We're so busy. Like our company has grown 500% over the last couple of years. And we project to have another, in the next 3 to 5 years to more than triple our population, our employee base. And I said, well, wait a second, let's talk about that, because what are you doing? You're getting opportunities to step into new roles, to have new responsibilities. That's growth. And so I think part of it is thinking about how do we frame the opportunities around us. Again, going back to it's not just a vertical advancement. It really is an opportunity to learn. In fact, the easy solution is for someone in HR or learning and development to say, or an executive, we need to have more programs available for people. We need to give them more training. We need to get an LMS in place. While all of those have good benefits, they sometimes lose sight of what growth is really about. What we know from adult education is that 70% of our learning comes from on-the-job experiences. Only 10% comes from a formal, kind of structured situation. What we're also finding with millennials is that they're looking for micro-learning is what's being termed as. These new opportunities, they're used to kind of quick models or information or frameworks that they can learn about in a kind of a video content. And then, but again, the trick is how do we take that and then use that in a way that is applied to our day-to-day work? Because again, the greatest experience, the greatest learning comes from just giving opportunities, framing it to you. Hey, Justin, instead of, I know you've got a lot on your plate and I'm sorry to ask you to do this. Frame it as, hey, Justin, this is a great opportunity for you to kind of leverage your ability to network with people. And here's a project that I really need your help on. Is this something you can help me solve? And again, changing that mentality of it's up to me as the manager to solve everything. When someone comes to me and says, hey, what do I do here? Or this is a problem. Okay, great. Well, what do you think we should do? Would you be willing to take that on?
Yeah.
So again, going back to the 50-50 and creating those portfolio of experiences and reframing for people what growth really is.
That's great. Kristin, this has been fantastic. Thank you for taking time to talk to us about growth and how it relates to employee engagement. Any last thoughts when it comes to into growth and how organizations and individuals can really apply this principle of growth in building and creating employee engagement?
Yeah, again, I would think of growth as this idea of movement, of constant challenging and stretching. And I, again, think about it in the day-to-day way. How do we in our meetings that we have, how do we have the conversations that help each other grow? What do we need to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to continue? It's like making it part of the conversation. And then growth, it becomes less of a kind of a formal experience that people go through, and it's that everyday part of your development and learning.
Great. Kristin, thank you so much for being here. This concludes our podcast for today. Thank you for listening, and watch for our other podcasts on the MAGIC model, meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection.